Welcome to MC Noctis, where every shadow has a story. Tonight, do not trust a gift simply because it fits inside you. At 2:17 in the morning, Nolan Price awoke to the sound of a judge's gavel striking inside his chest. The first blow stopped his breath. The second turned every framed photograph in his apartment toward the wall. After the third, the evidence jar on his nightstand began to move. His original heart floated inside it. It had been removed 6 nights earlier by a man Nolan brought home from an abandoned courtroom. A tall figure in a black judicial robe who called himself Judge Lucian Vale. The judge promised no wealth, beauty, or power. He only said Nolan's mind was being held back by a heart that objected to every difficult thought. Then he opened Nolan's ribs as quietly as a clerk opening a file drawer and replaced the organ with one carrying the memories of another man. By morning, Nolan could read a legal brief once and remember every word. By the third day, he could hear lies before they were spoken. By the 6th, his sleeping hand was writing verdicts against people he had never met. That night, the heart in the jar struck the glass from within. Nolan leaned closer. His own voice whispered through the lid. "Do not let him call the witness." Someone knocked at the apartment door. Dr. Elena Cross stood in the hallway, trembling beneath the fluorescent light. Nolan had seen her only an hour earlier at the hospital. She had possessed a different face then. Now, she wore the features of a woman who had vanished in 1908. Elena could still remember her career, her home, and every conversation she had shared with Nolan. But whenever she looked into the hallway mirror, her original face appeared behind the glass and pounded soundlessly to be released. From inside Elena's new mouth came the judge's voice. "Counsel is present. The witness has arrived." All the apartment lights went out. Somewhere beneath the building, 12 chairs scraped across a courtroom floor. This is not a story about becoming smarter. It is about what intelligence remembers after its owner is gone. And what happens when an infernal judge begins treating living bodies as evidence that can be rearranged. Nolan Price worked in the records division of Gray Cross County Courthouse in western Pennsylvania. At 34, he knew the location of every forgotten deposition in the building, but had failed the bar examination 3 times. He was not foolish. His mind simply moved with painful caution. Every answer divided into 5 possibilities, each possibility into 5 consequences, until time expired and the page remained unfinished. The courthouse staff treated him kindly, which Nolan found worse than ridicule. On the final night, before the old East Wing closed for renovation, several clerks shared bourbon in the archives. Someone mentioned the statue in Courtroom B. Judge Lucian Vale had never appeared in county histories. His wooden figure had simply occupied the sealed courtroom for as long as anyone remembered. Life-sized, robed, and seated behind a judge's bench. Old custodians claimed its head turned toward anyone who lied nearby. Nolan's co-workers dared him to bring the statue to the archives for 1 drink. He accepted because courage was the only quality no one had ever questioned in him. Courtroom B smelled of dust and extinguished candles. The statue sat beneath a sheet behind the bench. When Nolan uncovered it, he found a narrow face with closed eyes and both hands resting on a wooden gavel. An inscription ran along the chair. The body is testimony. The statue weighed almost nothing. Nolan carried it through the empty courthouse and brought it to his apartment after the others lost interest.
He placed it beside his dining table and poured 2 glasses. To the only judge who hasn't failed me yet. The lights dimmed. The statue's chair was empty. A tall man stood behind Nolan. His robe seemed made from the darkness between objects. Red sealing wax covered both eyelids, yet Nolan felt examined more completely than any living gaze had managed. "Your mind is not slow," the judge said. "Your heart interrupts it." Nolan could not move. Vale placed 2 cold fingers against his sternum. Something inside Nolan's chest recoiled from the touch. It objects. It doubts. It insists every answer carry mercy. Admirable qualities in a witness, defects in counsel. The judge opened a black case on the table. Inside lay a human heart beneath a folded evidence tag.
It was pale, perfectly still, and marked with a case number from 1908. Nolan asked who it belonged to. "A brilliant man," Vale replied. "He no longer requires it." The heart beat once. Every cabinet in the apartment opened. Nolan tried to step away, but the judge's shadow had already climbed his legs. It fastened him to the floor, while Vale removed a needle threaded with something darker than silk. "You brought the court into your home," the judge said. "That constitutes consent." Nolan's ribs clicked. One by one, they began to unlock. Nolan remained conscious. There was no incision. Judge Vale pressed his fingers against Nolan's chest, and the skin became transparent. Beneath it, the ribs opened outward like the narrow drawers of a filing cabinet. His heart struggled in the exposed darkness. Vale lifted it with both hands. The instant it left Nolan's body, fear vanished. Not pain, not awareness, only the part of him that believed pain mattered. Vale placed the living heart inside a glass evidence jar. It struck the walls hard enough to move the container across the table. The replacement was cold and heavier than it appeared. When the judge lowered it between Nolan's ribs, unfamiliar memories flashed behind his eyes. A crowded courtroom, a woman hiding bruises beneath powder, and Vale standing at a bench while someone shouted that the verdict had been purchased. The black thread passed through Nolan without leaving marks. By dawn, the judge and statue were gone. Only the jar remained. Nolan's old heart floated inside clear fluid, beating weakly beneath an evidence seal. His new heart did not beat forward. It seemed to draw each pulse inward. The change in Nolan's mind was immediate. Words no longer branched into uncertainty. He remembered every statute he had ever read and saw weaknesses in legal arguments as clearly as cracks in glass. At work, he corrected an attorney's filing from memory and drafted a motion in 12 minutes. For the first time, people stopped speaking slowly around him. Then, the heart revealed what else it could do. Whenever someone lied, it struck Nolan's ribs once. Small lies caused a quiet tap. Deliberate cruelty produced a blow that bent him over. By the end of the week, Nolan could enter a room and identify every concealed affair, stolen dollar, and false apology without knowing the details. At first, the ability felt like clarity. Then the heart began reacting to thoughts no one had spoken. On the third night, Nolan woke at his desk with black ink beneath his fingernails. 20 pages lay before him in handwriting that was not his.
They formed an appeal in a case called The Commonwealth Below versus Lucian Vale. The final page contained a list of witnesses. Most names had been crossed out. Beside one remained a recent photograph of Dr. Elena Cross, a forensic pathologist who occasionally testified at Greycross. Nolan tried to tear the page. His fingers closed around the paper and refused to move.
The new heart beat 3 times. From the evidence jar came 3 answering blows. Nolan broke the seal. His old heart rose to the surface. Veins pressed against the glass like fingers. His voice whispered from the fluid. That heart does not belong to a brilliant man. The apartment door opened behind him. Judge Vale entered without turning the handle.
"Of course it does," he said. "He was brilliant enough to convict me."
Vale visited at 2:17 each morning. He never arrived by the door twice. Sometimes his robe unfolded from beneath Nolan's bed. Once, he stepped out of a framed certificate, leaving the glass dark behind him. Each visit, he carried a sealed order. "Read it," he told Nolan. The first named a property attorney Nolan had never met. The document accused the man of hiding a tenant's complaint until an unsafe building collapsed. Nolan refused. The borrowed heart contracted. His ribs tightened around it. Air left his lungs while Vale waited with the calm of someone watching a clock. Nolan held out until the room began turning black, then read the sentence aloud. At 2:18, the heart relaxed. The following morning, the attorney was found seated outside Courtroom B. His eyes were open. Narrow strips of carbon paper protruded from his mouth, each carrying the same word: filed. Police called it an unexplained medical event. Vale brought another order the next night. Nolan tried leaving the apartment before 2:17. He reached the county highway, but every road sign changed to Courtroom B. His car radio began reading charges in the voice of the missing attorney. When he stopped, he was parked inside the courthouse lobby. The judge waited beside the elevator. By the 4th order, Nolan understood that the new heart contained more than knowledge. It carried the memory of Elias Voss, the special prosecutor who had convicted Vale in a secret proceeding in 1908. In dreams, Nolan saw the trial in pieces. Vale had offered alterations to wealthy clients: stronger lungs, steadier hands, more obedient faces. The organs came from prisoners and patients whose records were later erased. Elias Voss built the case with the help of one witness, a young court stenographer named Clara Bell. Clara had seen the evidence room beneath Courtroom B. She had also vanished before the sentence was carried out. Nolan's sleeping hand was not preparing Vale's appeal. The prosecutor's heart was reconstructing the charges. Vale knew it. The orders forced Nolan to condemn people whose secret wrongdoing strengthened the judge's authority in the living world. Every sentence made Courtroom B more solid. Dusty lamps began burning behind its sealed doors. Town residents heard chairs scraping beneath the courthouse after midnight. On the 6th night, Nolan carried his old heart to the county medical examiner's office. Dr. Elena Cross studied the jar without laughing. She had testified in enough difficult cases to recognize terror that had exhausted its need to persuade. Nolan asked her to examine his chest. When she placed the stethoscope against him, the borrowed heart stopped. A second heartbeat began inside the wall behind her. Then a woman's voice whispered through the instrument. "My name is Clara Bell." Elena removed the stethoscope. In the dark screen of the examination monitor, another woman stood directly behind her. The woman had no face. Imaging showed no scar, but the heart inside Nolan was positioned backward. Its vessels joined his body in ways Elena could not trace. Each time she froze the ultrasound image, a small, dark shape resembling a gavel appeared in a different chamber. Elena arranged an emergency operation before Nolan could change his mind. At 1:50 a.m., the surgical team placed him under anesthesia. Elena remained behind the observation window with his original heart. At 2:17, every monitor displayed the same words. Court is now in session. Nolan opened his eyes. The anesthetic had not failed. His body remained motionless, but he could feel every touch. The operating lights lengthened into hanging courtroom lamps. Green tile became dark wood. The surgeon's mask flattened into a blank judicial face, while his instruments arranged themselves by size on Nolan's chest. Judge Vale appeared in the reflection of the overhead lamp. "Unauthorized removal of evidence," he said. The surgeon made the first incision. The wound closed ahead of the blade. He tried again. This time, the instrument emerged from the observation window on the other side of the room, cutting a neat line through Elena's reflection without touching the glass. Elena's reflected face opened its eyes. Her real eyes remained shut. Vale turned toward her. "The witness has been difficult to locate." Behind Elena's image, the faceless woman raised both hands. The glass softened. Something pulled Elena forward. Nolan could not move or shout. His new heart hammered legal language through his ribs, while the surgeon and nurses stood frozen around him. The woman without a face pressed against Elena from the other side of the window. Their features passed through the glass in opposite directions. The lights went out. When they returned, the operating room was ordinary again. Nolan's chest had no incision. The surgeon lay beneath the table, repeatedly signing his own name across the floor with a marker. The nurses remembered nothing after 2:16. Elena stood at the observation window. Her height, voice, and memories remained unchanged. Her face belonged to someone else. The features were younger, pale, and unmistakably those of the woman from Nolan's dream of the 1908 trial. Elena touched her unfamiliar cheeks and screamed. The sound began in her own voice. It ended in another woman's. In every reflective surface, Elena's original face remained trapped behind the glass. It struck from within, leaving fogged handprints no one else could touch. Then, the borrowed mouth spoke without moving Elena's tongue. "My name is Clarabelle. I testified against Judge Vale." The heart inside Nolan beat once. From the jar in Elena's hands, Nolan's original heart answered. The elevator doors opened. Judge Vale stood inside, holding a wooden gavel and 12 folded jury summonses. Vale left the jury summonses inside the elevator and disappeared. Each carried the name of a Grey Cross resident. None had been delivered, yet all 12 recipients were found asleep in their homes, with black ink staining the same finger. Elena covered every mirror in her house. It made no difference. Her original face appeared in dark windows, coffee, polished instruments, and the blank screen of her phone. Sometimes it copied Elena. Sometimes it moved alone, looking desperately beyond her at something approaching. The borrowed face behaved differently. At 2:17 each morning, Clarabelle's features aged more than a century in seconds. The cheeks sank, the lips darkened. A pressure deep beneath Elena's skin forced her to stand and recite testimony in a voice recorded nowhere in living memory. "I saw no evidence," Clara's mouth would say. "Judge Vale altered no one. Elias Voss instructed me to lie." Eleanor remained conscious through every word.
Her own face screamed silently from the nearest reflective surface. Nolan searched the courthouse archives while the prosecutor's heart guided his hands. He found newspaper references to a private 1908 proceeding held after 7 patients disappeared from the county infirmary. Lucian Vale had served as both judge and physician to several powerful families. Rumors accused him of replacing damaged or inconvenient parts of their bodies with organs taken from prisoners. The public record ended before a verdict. The remaining pages had been cut from the ledger. At midnight, Nolan's old heart began striking its jar until a thin crack formed near the lid.
Fluid leaked onto a sheet of paper and shaped 3 words. Evidence Room 7. Elena's trapped reflection wrote the same message backward on a covered mirror. They returned to the East Wing before renovation crews arrived. Courtroom B was no longer sealed. Warm light glowed beneath its doors. Voices murmured inside, repeating legal phrases in the wrong order. Nolan looked through the narrow window and saw 12 empty jury chairs. Each chair contained a shadow shaped like a seated person. The statue of Vale had returned behind the bench. Its hands were empty. The wooden gavel was missing. Elena's borrowed face turned toward the floor. "He kept the evidence below us." Nolan found a keyhole beneath the judge's chair. His new heart struck once when the key approached, hard enough to make him drop it. The organ did not want him to enter. That was how Nolan knew they had found the right door. A staircase descended beneath the courthouse, farther than the building's foundation should allow. At the bottom waited a steel door marked with a black number 7. No handle appeared on their side. From beyond it came the sound of hundreds of hearts trying to beat at the same time. Then one stopped. The door opened inward. Evidence Room 7 was larger than the courthouse above. Shelves vanished into darkness, each holding glass containers under yellow lamps. Some contained only shadows, others held objects that turned away when Nolan looked directly at them. Evidence tags carried dates spanning more than 2 centuries. The room smelled of dust, antiseptic, and sealing wax. Nolan's original heart pulled toward the shelves inside its jar. Elena found her face stretched across an oval frame beneath glass. Its eyes opened when she approached. Its mouth formed her name. Beside it stood containers labeled Clara Bell, Facial Testimony, and Elias Voss, Prosecutorial Heart. Nolan finally understood. Vale had not chosen random parts. He had reconstructed the 2 people responsible for his conviction. Elias's heart supplied the prosecutor. Clara's face supplied the witness. But by placing both in living hosts, Vale could compel them to participate in a new trial under his authority. If Clara recanted and Nolan failed to object, the old verdict would collapse. The statue would no longer be a prison. Nolan reached for his original heart. The backward heart in his chest drove a blade of pressure through his ribs. His hand stopped inches from the jar. Elena lifted the glass covering her face. The borrowed features tightened around her skull. For 1 second, her reflection peeled free of the frame and reached toward her. Then every evidence tag in the room turned red. Judge Vale stood at the end of the aisle. No body filled his robe. Darkness held the cloth in human shape, while his wax-covered eyes appeared several inches behind where his face should have been. "Nothing is stolen once admitted into evidence," he said. Nolan accused him of arranging the operation and Elena's transformation. "I corrected 2 filing errors." Vale moved without walking. Shelves passed through him as he approached. Mr. Voss's heart was misplaced inside a man unable to use his own mind. Miss Bell's testimony lacked a living mouth. The court has restored both. Elena tried to speak, but Clara's face answered first. I am ready to testify. Her original face struck the glass frame so hard that a crack crossed one eye. Vale raised the missing gavel. The sound did not come from the wood. It came from every container in the room. Above them, 12 people woke and began walking toward Grey Cross Courthouse. Nolan saw them through flashes from Elias's memory. Ordinary adults leaving beds, crossing empty streets, and entering the East Wing with their eyes closed. Each carried a folded summons between their teeth. Vale took Nolan's heart jar from his hands. Original material will remain with the clerk until judgment. Elena seized the oval frame holding her face. The frame grew warm. Her fingers sank into the glass. Faces appeared beneath its surface, dozens of them, layered behind her own, all opening their mouths. Elena pulled free and left pieces of her reflection trapped inside. The lights shut off, one aisle at a time. From the darkness came the scrape of containers being opened. Nolan and Elena ran for the stairs. Something followed, without footsteps. Whenever Nolan looked back, another part of Judge Vale had appeared. First, the robe, then the waxed eyes, then 2 long hands holding the gavel. His mouth arrived last. It smiled from the darkness directly behind them. All rise. The staircase tilted. They fell upward into Courtroom B. 12 jurors sat with their eyes closed. Their chairs faced the wrong direction, toward the gallery rather than the bench. Folded summonses protruded from their mouths. Ink covered the fingers of their right hands. The gallery was full. Men and women in clothes from different decades occupied every row. Some breathed through unfamiliar mouths. Some held their heads at angles their borrowed necks could not support. Each bore an evidence tag tied somewhere to the body. Nolan stood at the prosecution table. He had not walked there. Elena sat in the witness chair while her original face watched from every window. Judge Vale lowered himself behind the bench. The statue remained seated within him, wooden features visible through the robe. The Commonwealth below versus Lucian Vale, he announced. Rehearing on the grounds of corrupted testimony and malicious prosecution. Nolan tried to object. His mouth said, no objection. The heart of Elias Voss hammered against his ribs, but Vale's black thread had tightened around it. Nolan felt the dead prosecutor fighting through him, forcing memories into his eyes. He saw Clara in 1908 entering evidence room 7. He saw shelves of organs taken from people whose only crime was being powerless. He saw Vale offering those parts to wealthy clients, while writing the original owners out of county records. Then the memory stopped. Vale called the witness. Elena's borrowed face lifted. Clara's voice emerged smooth and obedient. I fabricated my account. Judge Vale committed no alteration without consent. Behind her, Elena's real face slammed against the window. Cracks spread through its reflection, but not the glass. Nolan's new heart struck once for a lie. The blow nearly dropped him. Vale asked whether the prosecution wished to challenge the witness. Black thread pulled Nolan's jaw closed. The jurors began writing, "Not guilty," across their clothing with stained fingers. Nolan looked toward the evidence table. His original heart stood inside its jar beside the judge. It possessed no perfect memory, no legal genius, and no authority. It contained only the cautious part of Nolan that Vale despised, the impulse to doubt a simple answer. The heart struck the glass. Once, twice. On the third blow, every juror opened their eyes. Nolan's jaw loosened.
He asked Clara what she had seen inside evidence room 7. Vale brought down the gavel.
The courtroom folded. Walls became the green tile of an operating room. Benches turned into narrow tables with leather restraints. The gallery's occupants lay flat as invisible instruments moved above them. Question overruled. The borrowed heart stopped. Nolan collapsed. Elena stood from the witness chair, although Vale ordered her to remain. Clara's face continued denying everything, but Elena's own voice pushed through beneath it. 89 containers. Vale struck the gavel again. The borrowed features twisted painfully. 89 people, Elena said. None consented. The gallery turned toward the bench. Evidence tags lifted from their bodies like small white tongues. Vale rose. His empty robe expanded until it touched the ceiling. The witness is hostile. Every reflective surface in the courtroom broke at once. Elena's original face stepped out of the falling fragments. It had no body. It crossed the courtroom as a thin, shining shape and placed itself over Clara's face. For one moment, both women looked out through the same eyes. Then they spoke together. Guilty. Beneath the courthouse, every container in evidence room 7 began to open. The sound rose through the floor like applause made from beating hearts. Judge Vale struck his gavel, but the opened evidence no longer obeyed. Shadows poured beneath the courtroom doors. They carried fragments of voices, faces, and memories that had spent decades labeled as property. The jurors pulled the summonses from their mouths. Guilty, the first said. The word moved around the box until all 12 were awake and speaking. Vale's robe collapsed inward. For the first time, something like fear disturbed the wax over his eyes. A verdict requires lawful counsel. Nolan forced himself upright. The borrowed heart remained still. Elias Voss had spent more than a century waiting to finish the proceeding, but the black thread now strangled the organ inside Nolan. His original heart struck its jar again. Vale lifted the container. Choose carefully, Mr. Price. Return to the heart that made you ordinary, and the only mind capable of completing this case will disappear. Nolan saw the trap. Vale still treated every part as if its value came from usefulness. The judge believed Nolan would preserve borrowed brilliance rather than become himself again. Nolan broke the evidence seal. His ribs unlocked. Both hearts began beating, one in his chest, one inside the jar, at different rhythms. The courtroom flickered between trial and operating room. Invisible hands reached toward Nolan, preparing an exchange. He took the backward heart from his chest. Elias's final memory passed through him. The prosecutor had never completed Vale's sentence because the judge removed his heart before the last words could be entered. Those words did not require genius. They required a living voice. Nolan placed his original heart against the open space in his chest. It returned with one terrified beat. Fear flooded back. So did doubt, pain, and mercy. He spoke the sentence anyway. Lucian Vale is denied all claim to the bodies of the living and the forgotten. The black thread snapped. The borrowed heart struck the floor once. Its final pulse traveled beneath the bench and split the wooden statue from head to base. Vale screamed. It was not one voice. Every person he had altered screamed through him as the shadows from evidence room 7 seized his robe. His hands stretched toward Nolan, changing from young to ancient, delicate to calloused, as each stolen part withdrew its shape. The judge collapsed into the cracked statue. Elena raised both hands to her face. The shining outline of her original features pressed inward. Clara's face resisted, then softened. For a moment, Elena felt both lives, the physician she had become and the stenographer who had waited more than a century to be believed. The courtroom lights failed. When they returned, dawn showed through ordinary windows. The 12 jurors woke with no memory of leaving home. Evidence room 7 was gone. Beneath the bench, investigators later found only a shallow foundation filled with dust. Nolan's intelligence disappeared with Elias's heart. Legal language once again divided into uncertainty. He resigned from the records office and never attempted the bar examination again. Elena's transformation did not fully reverse. To other people, she wore her original face. In mirrors and dark windows, Clara Bell still looked back. Sometimes the reflection mouthed warnings a moment before danger arrived. Sometimes it only watched Elena live the years stolen from her. Judge Vale's statue was placed in a sealed county warehouse. It had no hands. The gavel was never recovered. 3 months later, Nolan awoke at 2:17 a.m. His heart was beating backward. On his nightstand stood the evidence jar, although he had watched it shatter in Courtroom B. Something floated inside. The label read, Nolan Price, Original Heart. Nolan placed both hands against his chest. From within came a single strike of wood. Then Judge Vale whispered between the beats, "Motion to reconsider." A gifted mind, a different face, a stronger body. Miracles become frightening when no one asks where the replacement came from. Nolan believed intelligence could be separated from the person who earned it. Judge Vale believed every human being could be reduced to useful evidence. In the end, the stolen heart and borrowed face remembered more than either man expected. But the jar on Nolan's nightstand leaves one question unanswered. Did he recover his original heart? Or did the judge merely change the label? Thank you for listening to MC Noctis. Tell me in the comments, if a supernatural gift made you exceptional overnight, what would make you question who paid for it? Like the video and subscribe for the next journey into the dark. And if you wake at 2:17 a.m. to a wooden knock inside your chest, do not search for a scar. Check the mirrors. Check the evidence label. Then listen carefully. The judge may already be waiting for you to object.